Before we dive into the chilling depths of what you're about to hear, please do me a favor, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who truly appreciates a good, unsettling story. Also, I'm curious. Tell me in the comments below, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Your answers always add another layer to this shared experience of unsettling tales. Thank you. I used to believe that silence was a sanctuary, that in the quiet you found peace, clarity, a space for your thoughts to expand without interruption. For many years, I sought it out, craving the hushed corners of libraries, the deserted aisles of late-night bookstores. I found a certain comfort in the absence of noise, in the gentle hum of fluorescent lights, the distant whir of an air vent, and the soft rustle of turning pages. It felt safe, predictable, a rhythmic certainty in an otherwise chaotic world. But safety, I've learned, isn't simply about quiet. It's about being seen. It's about the comforting presence of other beating hearts, even if they're strangers. And the night you lose that reassurance, when the quiet stretches too thin and the shadows grow too long, that silence turns into something else entirely. Something hollow, something predatory, something that waits. This is a collection of experiences, mine and others, from places where quiet was supposed to be a friend, but became an accomplice to fear. Places where the normal twisted into the truly terrifying, and the mundane became a doorway to the profoundly disturbing. Story 1. The Overseer. In the obscurity. I was 22, freshly graduated, and buried under a mountain of student debt when I landed the graveyard shift at the old municipal archive. It wasn't the kind of job you brag about at parties. Midnight to 8 a.m., 5 nights a week. My duties were simple: digitize ancient blueprints, reshelve historical documents, and essentially act as a human security camera in a building that had witnessed more history than most towns. The archive itself was a monolith of gray stone and echoing hallways, constructed in the 1950s, long before the city outgrew its original foundations. It sat on the outskirts of town, nestled between a forgotten industrial park and a stretch of undeveloped wetlands. At night, it felt like the last building left on Earth. The windows, thick with dust and grime, offered no view of the outside world, just distorted reflections of the flickering fluorescent lights within. Inside, the air was heavy with the distinct scent of old paper, fine dust, and something else, a faint metallic tang, reminiscent of distant rain on iron. Most nights were uneventful. I'd wander through the cavernous storage rooms, the only sounds being the soft click of my worn boots on the polished linoleum, the gentle whir of the industrial dehumidifiers, and the rhythmic thump-thump of the old elevator system on the far side of the building. I'd pop in my earbuds, listen to podcasts, and try to make the hours crawl by. My supervisor, a quiet woman named Eleanor in her late 50s, would leave a detailed checklist each evening. She was particular about everything, from the way files were cross-referenced to the precise angle of the archive lamps. She'd lock up precisely at midnight and wouldn't return until 8 a.m., leaving me completely alone in the vast structure. For the first few months, I truly loved the solitude. It was a perfect escape from the noisy, cramped apartment I shared with 2 roommates. I could think, I could breathe. I even started bringing a small portable heater for my desk, because the building's heating system was as ancient and unreliable as the documents I processed. It was my own quiet corner of the world, a temporary sanctuary. Then things started to shift. It began subtly, with the elevator. I rarely used it. My work mostly kept me on the main floor and in the basement, but every single night, around 3:15 a.m., I'd hear it. Thump, thump, the sound of the old mechanism grinding to life. A slow, deliberate ascent. It would reach the third floor, pause for a long minute, then descend back to the ground floor. No one ever exited. No one ever entered. I'd check the security logs repeatedly. No one was logging in or out, and the motion sensors showed nothing. I told myself it was just the old machinery settling, the building creaking in the cold, or perhaps a phantom electrical surge, but it was too consistent, too precise. Every night, at precisely 3:15, one night, driven by a growing surge of unease, I decided to wait. I sat at my desk, eyes glued to the security monitor that displayed the third floor hallway. The elevator arrived. Thump, thump, thump. Its rusty cage shuddering to a halt. The old indicator light glowed red, then green. The doors slowly, agonizingly, hissed open. They revealed nothing but the dimly lit, empty hallway. No one stepped out. No one was there. After a full minute, the doors groaned shut, and the elevator descended. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. The next unsettling incident involved the lights. The archive was a maze of pull-cord lights, dim bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows. I was meticulous about turning them off as I left a section. It was part of my routine, part of the quiet order I had imposed on the vast space. But more and more often, I would return to a section I had just left, only to find a light, sometimes two, glowing faintly in the distance. It wasn't always the same light. Sometimes it was in the rare book section, sometimes in the old map room, sometimes in a small, forgotten alcove where old microfiche readers sat collecting dust. I tried to rationalize it. Faulty wiring, old switches, perhaps the building settling causing a jolt, but the feeling that someone or something was following me, just out of sight, began to take root. I started to check the lights meticulously, double-checking each switch, even taking photos on my phone to prove to myself that I had indeed turned them off. Yet, the lights would still reappear. It was a subtle, psychological torment, making me question my own memory, my own sanity. The climax of my experience at the archive came on a particularly cold Tuesday night. Outside, a late autumn storm raged, rattling the old windows and whistling through unseen cracks in the stone. Inside, the archive felt even more isolated than usual, the hum of the dehumidifiers barely audible over the howling wind. I was in the basement, meticulously reshelving a collection of 19th century city ledgers. The air was colder down there, damp, with a distinct smell of damp earth and decay. I had my small portable heater aimed at my feet, and the single overhead light swayed slightly in a non-existent breeze. I was halfway through the third row of ledgers when I heard it, a soft scraping sound like fingernails dragging across stone. It came from the back corner of the basement, an area I rarely ventured into, a narrow, unlit passage that led to the old boiler room. I froze, my hand still resting on a dusty ledger. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, listening intently. Nothing. Just the wind outside and the distant thump, thump, thump of the elevator, right on schedule at 3:15. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vastness of the basement. No answer. I told myself it was just mice, or perhaps the old pipes contracting in the cold. But then a low, guttural growl echoed from the dark passage. It wasn't animalistic, it was deep, distinctly human-like, filled with an ancient, weary malice. My heart leaped into my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. heavy as lead. The flashlight on my belt felt impossibly heavy, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I reached for it. I clicked it on, its beam cutting a shaky path into the absolute darkness. Nothing, just the shadows, stretching and dancing like living things. Then, I saw it, 2 pinpricks of light, reflecting the beam of my flashlight, deep within the passage. They were low to the ground, far too low for a standing person, and they weren't human eyes. They were too large, too unnervingly still. They held my gaze, unblinking. A wave of primal fear washed over me, a cold, suffocating dread that felt heavier than the weight of all the history contained within that building. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice was a frozen knot in my throat. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on those 2 points of light. They didn't move. They just watched. I reached the basement door, my hand fumbling desperately for the handle. I burst out, slamming the heavy door behind me, the deafening sound echoing through the empty halls. I didn't stop running until I reached the main entrance, fumbling with the keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't care about Eleanor's checklist. I didn't care about anything but getting out. I quit the next morning, without explanation. Eleanor just nodded, her eyes surprisingly understanding, as if she knew some things were better left unsaid. I never told anyone exactly what I saw or what I felt. They wouldn't believe me anyway. Now I work in a bustling office building surrounded by people, by noise, by the comforting cacophony of everyday life. I never work alone anymore, especially at night. And sometimes, when I find myself in a quiet room, or when the lights flicker, I can still feel those 2 pinpricks of light watching me from the darkness. And I wonder what or who was truly living in that archive, what truly lurked in the obscurity, silently overseeing its forgotten history. I used to believe that silence was a sanctuary, that in the quiet you found peace, clarity, a space for your thoughts to expand without interruption. For many years, I sought it out, craving the hushed corners of libraries, the deserted aisles of late-night bookstores. I found a certain comfort in the absence of noise, in the gentle hum of fluorescent lights, the distant whir of an air vent, and the soft rustle of turning pages. It felt safe, predictable, a rhythmic certainty in an otherwise chaotic world. But safety, I've learned, isn't simply about quiet. It's about being seen. It's about the comforting presence of other beating hearts, even if they're strangers. And the night you lose that reassurance, when the quiet stretches too thin and the shadows grow too long, that silence turns into something else entirely. Something hollow, something predatory, something that waits. This is a collection of experiences, mine and others, from places where quiet was supposed to be a friend, but became an accomplice to fear. Places where the normal twisted into the truly terrifying, and the mundane became a doorway to the profoundly disturbing. Story 2. The Late Night Listener. I used to think that the anonymity of the road was liberating. Just me, the asphalt, and the endless expanse of a country night. I was 27, a long-haul truck driver for a small independent company, spending weeks at a time traversing the highways, delivering everything from frozen produce to industrial machinery. My rig, a battered but reliable 1997 Freightliner, was my home. I ate, slept, and lived in that cramped cab, the constant rumble of the engine, a familiar lullaby. My favorite part of the job was the solitude. No demanding bosses, no nosy neighbors, just the open road and the scattered lights of distant towns. I'd listen to audiobooks, talk radio, or sometimes just the profound silence. I preferred the quiet rest stops, the ones off the main interstates, where only a handful of truckers poured in for the night. They felt like secret havens, places where you could truly disappear for a few hours. It started on a run through rural Montana, late spring, a cold, clear night with a sky full of indifferent stars. I pulled into a small, unlit rest area, just a gravel lot and a single picnic table beneath a gnarled oak tree. No amenities, no gas station, just a place to shut down the engine and catch a few hours of sleep. I parked my rig at the far end of the lot, away from the two other trucks already there. The air was crisp, silent, save for the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. I climbed into my bunk, pulled the curtains tight, and settled down with my dinner, a cold cut sandwich and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. As I ate, I noticed something strange, a rhythmic tapping, tap, tap, tap. It was faint at first, barely audible over the remnants of the engine noise. I dismissed it as a loose piece of my truck, or maybe the wind, but it persisted, steadily, almost deliberately. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. The tapping continued, becoming slightly clearer. It sounded like it was coming from outside my cab, right near the passenger side door. I pulled back a sliver of the curtain and peered out into the darkness. Nothing, just the dark, the gravel, and the faint outlines of the two other trucks in the distance. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the night. I tried to sleep, but the tapping continued, relentless. It wasn't frantic, not aggressive. It was slow, steady, like someone patiently trying to get my attention. Tap, 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 tap. A chill crept up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. I reached for my phone, the screen illuminating my face in the darkness. No signal, of course. This was a dead zone. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the incessant rhythm. My mind raced, conjuring images of broken-down hitchhikers, desperate strangers, or something far worse. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something not human? The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling my blanket tighter, desperately wishing for the dawn. At some point, the tapping stopped. The sudden, profound silence was almost more terrifying than the noise itself. I lay rigid, listening to the frantic pounding of my own heart, convinced that whatever was out there was now just waiting. I must have drifted off into an uneasy sleep, because the next thing I knew, the first sliver of gray light was breaking over the horizon. I immediately sat up, my body aching with tension. I peered out the window. Nothing. The other two trucks were still there, silent and still. The rest stop looked exactly as it had the night before, but as I started my engine and the truck came to life, something caught my eye. On the passenger side mirror, etched into the grime and condensation, was a single, perfectly rendered smiley face. It was small, crude, but unmistakably clear, and beneath it, written in what looked like finger-drawn letters, were two words, "Sweet Dreams." I slammed the truck into gear and peeled out of that rest stop faster than I ever had, leaving a thick cloud of dust in my wake. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. A full 2 hours down the highway, I immediately pulled over, heart hammering, and scrubbed that mirror clean until my fingers were raw. I checked every inch of my truck, underneath, on the tires, inside the engine compartment. Nothing, no one, just the ordinary wear and tear of a long-haul rig. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep in my truck. I'd pay for motel rooms, no matter how expensive or dingy. I started parking in well-lit truck stops, surrounded by dozens of other rigs. The comforting cacophony of idling engines and distant conversations, a balm to my frayed nerves. I told myself it was just a prank, a bored kid, a strange coincidence, but I knew that drawing, those two words, weren't just a joke, they were a chilling message. A message from someone who had been there, just inches from my face, watching me sleep, listening to my breathing. Someone who had waited in the dark, silent and patient. Now, years later, I still drive the long hauls, but I never, ever park in an unlit rest stop. I never sleep with the curtains fully closed, and every single time I climb into my bunk, no matter how tired I am, I check that passenger side mirror every single time, because some fears don't need a knife or a pipe to cut deep. Some fears just need to be patient and quiet and let you know they were truly there. Story 3. The Echoes of the Abandoned Theater. And I was 18, fresh out of high school, and convinced I knew everything. Life was an open road, and I was the fastest car on it. My confidence was cheap, fueled by youthful bravado and a healthy dose of ignorance. That summer, I took on odd jobs, painting, minor renovations, anything that paid cash and didn't require me to wear a tie. My cousin Mark, who was 10 years older and a seasoned handyman, would throw me some work whenever he had a bigger project. He liked my willingness to work, my lack of complaints, and most importantly, my cheap hourly rate. Mark called me one scorching July morning, the kind of oppressive heat that hung in the air like a thick, wet blanket. He said he had a special job for me, a demolition gig that needed to be done quickly. It's an old theater, downtown, been empty for 20 years, he explained over the phone. The owner wants the old seating and stage props cleared out before he sells it. Easy money. I'll drop you off at 8 a.m., pick you up at 5 p.m. Just bring your own water and a strong back. I arrived at the old majestic theater at precisely 8 a.m. Even in the morning sun, the building was a hulking shadow against the bright sky. Its grand, ornate facade was crumbling, the paint peeling, and the giant marquee sign, once emblazoned with names of forgotten stars, was now just a rusted frame. A faded poster for a 1970s horror film still clung stubbornly to the glass of the ticket booth, its colors bleached by decades of sun. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp concrete, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like forgotten popcorn mixed with decay. Mark unlocked the heavy, creaking stage door, a single beam of light cutting through the profound gloom within. "Power's off, of course," he said, handing me a heavy-duty flashlight. "Just work your way from the back of the auditorium forward. Stack everything neatly in the lobby. And whatever you do, don't go wandering backstage. Nothing but rats and asbestos back there." He grinned, slapped me on the back, and disappeared in a cloud of dust from his beat-up pickup truck, promising to be back at 5 o'clock sharp. The first few hours were tedious, but straightforward. The auditorium was a vast, silent cavern, its seats draped in white sheets, looking like a ghostly audience. I started systematically pulling out the old velvet seats, their springs groaning in protest, their wooden frames splintering. Each thud, as a seat hit the dusty floor, echoed for what felt like an eternity. I worked in the focused beam of my flashlight, the silence broken only by my grunts of effort and the occasional drip of water from an unseen leak in the ceiling. The air grew heavy, stale, like trapped breath. It wasn't exactly cold, but it felt unnaturally still. Around noon, I broke for a quick lunch, a sandwich and a warm bottle of water. I sat on a stack of broken seats in the aisle, the flashlight illuminating my small circle of temporary peace. As I ate, I started to hear it, faint, almost imperceptible, a low, rhythmic creaking. It sounded like it was coming from the stage, from the very planks I had been warned not to touch. I dismissed it as the old building settling, the wood expanding and contracting in the heat. But it felt different. It felt deliberate. I finished my lunch and went back to work, trying my best to ignore the sound, but it continued, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, like someone pacing just out of sight. I started to glance nervously at the stage, my flashlight darting into the darkened wings, but saw nothing, just shadows and dust. Then, at around 2 o'clock, while I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn row of seats, I heard a new sound, a faint, almost musical whisper. It wasn't words, not exactly, more like a soft, mournful sigh, then a rising inflection, like a question, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, swirling around me in the vast, empty space. I froze, my hands still gripping the dusty seat. The creaking stopped. The theater was absolutely terrifyingly silent.
Hello?
I whispered, my voice barely audible, completely swallowed by the immense silence. The whisper came again, closer this time, just behind my right ear. It sent a profound shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air. It was a cold, alien presence. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing, no one. A rising sense of panic began to set in. This wasn't just an old building settling. This wasn't a rat. This was something else. Something that felt ancient and malevolent. I tried to focus on my task, tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, the oppressive heat, the profound isolation, but the whispering persisted. Sometimes a soft murmur, sometimes a distinct guttural sigh, always just beyond comprehension. The climax came as the sun began to set, around 4:30 p.m. The light filtering through the grimy front windows had turned from a dull gray to a bruised purple, casting the auditorium in an eerie twilight. I had cleared out most of the seats and was now working on a pile of old stage props near the orchestra pit, faded backdrops, fake trees, broken instruments. As I bent down to pick up a stack of painted flats, I heard a clear, distinct thud from directly overhead. Not a creak, not a whisper, a heavy, solid sound, like something large had fallen. I looked up, my flashlight beam sweeping across the high ceiling, the old stained proscenium arch, and then the catwalks high above the stage. And there it was, a figure, silhouetted against the faint bruised light from a small, high window. It was tall, impossibly thin, almost skeletal. It was hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, watching me. Its limbs seemed too long, too spindly. It wasn't moving, not really, but the way it leaned into the silence, the way it seemed to absorb the dim light, made my blood run cold. It felt less like a person and more like a twisted marionette, hung by invisible strings. I dropped the props. The clatter echoed violently through the theater. The figure didn't react. It just stared. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I was locked in a horrifying tableau with this thing. Then, slowly, agonizingly, slowly, its head began to turn. Not its body, just its head, rotating until it faced me fully. Even from that distance, I could feel its gaze, a suffocating, ancient weight, and then a sound, not a whisper, not a growl, a high, keening wail, like a broken instrument, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief and rage that filled the entire theater, vibrating through the floorboards, through my very bones. I didn't think. I ran. I scrambled over the piles of seats, tripping and stumbling in the near darkness, my flashlight abandoned on the floor. I burst through the stage door, fumbling with the heavy lock, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert the key. I slammed it shut, the terrifying wail still echoing in my ears, chasing me. I didn't stop running until I was a full mile down the road. I only stopped when my legs gave out, burning with exhaustion, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Mark found me an hour later, huddled by the side of the road, trembling uncontrollably. He took one look at my ashen face and the pure terror in my eyes, and he didn't ask questions. He just drove. Later, much later, when I was calmer, he told me stories, old rumors passed down through generations of local contractors, stories of a jealous stagehand who murdered an actress he was obsessed with, and where he was later found, having met a grim fate right there above the stage. Stories of shadows seen dancing on the stage, of mournful cries echoing from the empty auditorium at night, ghost stories, urban legends. But I didn't care if they were true or not. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. That was the last solo demolition job I ever took. Now I always work with a crew. I check every dark corner, every shadow. And I never ever enter an old abandoned building alone, especially after dusk. And sometimes when I pass an empty theater late at night, I swear I can still hear that high, keening wail, a broken echo of ancient grief, whispering from the darkness.
So, let me ask you, when faced with the inexplicable, the things that lurk in the quiet and defy logic, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, trying to find a rational explanation? Or would you have trusted your gut and run into the dark, into the unknown?
Silence can be a comfort, a solace, but it can also be a canvas for the unseen, a stage for the terrifying. The places we deem safe, the routines we cling to, can be shattered in an instant, leaving us forever changed, forever wary of the quiet. Thank you for listening to these tales. If you found them unsettling, or if they made you question your own sense of security, then I've done my job. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more unsettling stories, and share it with a friend who might appreciate a good chill. And please leave a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most disturbing things are the ones that don't make a sound until it's already too late.